No surprise about the title, I presume. I'm very happy to have this be the topic for what I believe is my last lecture here in Santa Barbara for the rest of this year. Next year, a lot of traveling. This is one very close to my heart is on a personal level, so I'd like to briefly address that, but I think it's also of tremendous relevance globally, not just for this country. Very briefly, on a personal note, as quite a number of you, my old friends here know, I come from a very religious background. Father's Baptist theologian, and Bible school teachers, missionaries, theologians all over the family tree on both sides. So that was very much part of my upbringing. As I grew into my teens, early 20s, it became very apparent to me also not only the value of religion, that it has served humanity in many ways of tremendous value over the many centuries that the various world religions have been around, but also the many terrible things done in the name of religion, which sets it up as a very easy target. On the one hand, religion couldn't simply abandon it. One of those things you can't live with it, can't live without it. But also science. From a very early age of 13, I was absolutely set on a career in science, specifically in biology, environmental studies, ecology. And what I was not satisfied to do, and it became very poignant for me, very clear by the time I was in my teens, my late teens, is I was simply not willing to abandon religion as simply superstition, a really awful superstition, or a bad institution, in favor of science, nor was I willing to abandon science, which is frankly unthinkable, in the favor of religion. Neither one of those were options, but also another option that just I found profoundly unsatisfying, basically intolerable, was to think, well, that was the thought or the prospect, well, I'll devote myself to science, and that means embracing a scientific worldview, and I will devote myself to religious practice, a worldview, and I'll just keep them separate, as if I've got two brains. You know, I keep one in a satchel, and they won't talk with each other, but when I need my religion part, I'll just pop that out like having two hard drives, and I'll just think religiously, and then I'll just turn that one dormant and then think scientifically. So in other words, engaging kind of a doublethink. And my father, being a theologian and also an ordained minister, preaching all over the LA basin when I was growing up, he found this type of doublethink very, very common in the Christian churches in which he taught, where people, very bright, very well-educated, very critically minded, just before they step across the threshold into church, would then suddenly their minds would, as it were, turn into pablum. You know, all gooey and mushy and just being very sanctimonious and very pious and very gullible and whatever the preacher says, right on, baby, and sing hymns, and then step out the door, and once it began to really be smart and critical and sharp and intelligent. And it really exasperated him, because he's actually a very good scholar, and he, I think, has a very intelligent approach to his own faith. And it exasperated him when he would see people operating in this kind of bipolar way. And for me, that was really never an option. At the same time, during this era, the late 60s, I didn't find anyone at all, I mean, bar no one, I didn't find anybody who was bringing about a really intelligent synthesis and integration between a profoundly spiritual worldview, a profoundly scientific worldview, where they're not just parallel, like two parallel processes that do not interact, but rather fully integrated, so one can have one world, one integrated mind, an integrated way of life. I didn't see that. And so that really has defined much of what I've done over the last, going on 40 years now. So that's personal. On a global level, I think it's very obvious now. It's coming up once again in politics. Once again, we have this presidential election. Once again, issues are coming up. Of faith versus reason, faith versus science. Is global warming, is that scientific data is that credible, or is it just the natural cycles of nature? Evolution, it just doesn't go away. The whole issue between, you know, fundamentalist religion and evolution, it seems like a song people never tire of singing or screeching or what have you. And so there it is within this country, but also globally. Religious fundamentalism, religious dogmatism, especially in its more militant mode, is adamantly on the side of religion, and quite adamantly, equally adamantly on the side against science, against anything that would contradict or call into question religious faith. And there are people, I think, just as militant, I've met some of them, who are just absolutely militantly advocating science, but embedded in a worldview that is hardcore atheism, which means they're very happy to go out and stamp out religions. And of course it has happened, especially in communist regimes, where it's a type of fundamentalism all over again. It just doesn't happen to be religious, it happens to be atheistic. But the same attitude and the same militant exclusivism, we alone have the right way. And so we're seeing this now globally. And so it strikes me that this issue of the interrelationship, the balancing between experience, reason, and faith, the overall interface between science and religion is coming almost to a crescendo, perhaps. I think it's coming to a real hot point where each side is quite convinced it's going to win. The religious fundamentalists, God's on our side. And the hardcore scientific materialists, what have you, reason is on our side, empirical fact is on our side. Just give it long enough and those doggone religion will die a death, natural or unnatural, but the sooner the better. I think they're all profoundly mistaken. The notion that science is going to wither away because everybody adopts one religious creed, let's get real. The notion that religions that have been around for millennia are going to die away, it's just silly. It's not rational, it's not scientific. And so somehow there needs to be, I think, some integration here. But what I'm looking for is something more than an amicable cohabitation, an amicable kind of interrelationship where we get along chummy and we have friendly conversations. I think we are poised historically for something unprecedented. To my mind, having a fairly significant scientific background and a lot of background, first of all in Christianity, for the last almost 40 years now in Buddhism, it's apparent to me that dogma has really set in on both sides of the fence. A lot of very rigid thinking, closed-minded thinking, refusal to pose certain types of questions, refusal to look into certain types of evidence, because they just go against the grain. They just contradict what one is already convinced is true. I think we are poised for something quite unprecedented, quite marvelous, and that is an unprecedented revolution in the natural sciences, which will start finally, and really for the first time, taking consciousness and mind more seriously, more empirically than ever done before. So within science, a true revolution from the inside out, really fathoming the nature and the potentials, the multiple dimensions of consciousness, which science has been notoriously weak at, but also in religion. And this is not at all the notion that one religion has come and trump all the other ones, like Buddhism has all the right answers, let's all become Buddhist. That's not going to happen. That's equally unrealistic. But rather that the great religions of the world may rediscover their own profoundly experiential roots, a true sense of questing, a true sense of seeking, and not simply getting a whole bundle full of right answers and then sitting on it. So the notion of religion being a path rather than a dwelling place. Science being not simply a profession, but a path. In other words, both of these being paths of inquiry, paths of questioning, paths of being willing to question one's own assumptions, even the most existential ones, the ones that really grip your very heartstrings, the very sense of who you are. I think we are poised for something quite marvelous, where there could not only be an amicable integration between the two, but the two could resonate with each other, challenge each other, rejuvenate, revitalize each other in ways that I think, frankly, has never happened before. That's my hope. That's why I'm talking tonight. That's why I'm addressing this topic tonight. I'll start with this quote I've often cited in earlier lectures all over the place from Daniel Boorstin, a very eminent American historian, wrote a whole book called The Discoverers, a history of humanity's discoveries over roughly the last 5,000 years. It's quite a classic, a little modern classic. And he comments in the preface, having spent, I'm sure, years doing the research for this about 500-page book, that he's noted a tendency, a trend, a recurring theme throughout human history. What blocked great discoveries? Now, when he speaks of discoveries, frankly, there aren't any in religion. Religion's packed off there with belief, faith, institutions, dogma. So he pretty much scuttles that. And religion is on the side of the great explorers, Magellan, and the scientific explorers, the astronomers, and so forth and so on. So that's the way he cuts it. So the modernist notion of discovery. But within that genre of discovery about the natural world, he found this recurrent theme that it's not ignorance but illusions of knowledge that have historically proven to be the principal obstacles of discovery. And I say I've misspelled principle. P-A-L. The illusions of knowledge. The illusions of knowledge.